Very interesting, and your response is leading to the next question. When we talk of government industry partnership, as a broker of government and industry, what are the secrets of successfully bringing together diverse stakeholders to achieve a common goal? You mentioned workshops, and so what are those key secrets to successfully bring together diverse stakeholders to achieve a common goal, like in the case of plant protection now?
I would add to that, the public, citizens and citizen science. So eyes on the ground are all important, because as an expert in plant pathology, you can't see very much. So if you want to scale up, you go to agronomists and they have access to fields, but the public, the farmers, they are your best advocates for early warning on pest and disease and things that are unusual. So if I think of maize lethal necrosis in Kenya, that was first reported by farmers in a district saying some fire is happening in my field, and fire wasn't burning, it was just scalding of the leaves and the viruses. They then worked with the National Plant Protection Organisation and KEFIS to try and understand it. They sent samples to FERA and we identified it as maize lethal necrosis, doing some good science. And then you have the interactions with the industry, because this is seed spread. And regulations have to be strong in these situations to really bring about that partnership. And probably in Africa, the regulations aren't strong enough to control the movement of seed between countries. And I know a lot of donor-supported aid led to movement of maize seed across East Africa, which carried maize lethal necrosis with it, under the context of emergency relief. So I think this area of private-public partnership and governments and that is really critical to understand. And in different countries, it will have different meanings, I think. So here at Rothamsted, one of the main things I've been trying to do is looking at pesticide resistance. And I think pesticide resistance globally is a real concern for us. It's one of the issues in plant health, because we're facing less and less choice on regulatory mode of action chemicals that we can use. So our choice is getting less, and pathogens are getting resistance to these few that remain. So in the UK, I'm trying to develop a platform by which we do, institutes like Rothamsted do the testing for pesticide resistance, but the industry provides us with the samples. Because the industry is out there all the time through the agronomists and the farmers. They just have to pick things up and put them in the post, literally. Places like Rothamsted and other institutes can provide these services too. FERA, NIAB, ADAS, we can create an industry. And the hardest part of that is getting the samples. But once the samples are here, we do need someone to pay for it. And we could ask industry to pay for all of that. But actually DEFRA is interested in those data too. They want to see the trends in pesticide resistance. They want to see how much pesticide is being used and how effective that pesticide is, because then they can demonstrate that they're reducing pesticide use in the country. Industry is interested in pesticide resistance because they want to make sure that their chemicals remain effective and on the shelf and bought for by farmers. So I think, again, there is that partnership and that shared value, that opportunity for industry and government to come together under sort of the stewardship of pesticide resistance to create a set of an outcome based on evidence of resistance and susceptibility and emerging trends, whereby everybody wins. And so creating that dialogue is what we're trying to do here at Rothamsted, and we've got a lot of interest in that. It's one of those strange things when you think, well, why is it not happening better? Because it's so logical that everybody should do this. And I think these things applies also in other countries, but maybe to greater or lesser extent, depending on where they are, shall we say, in their sort of risk profiles. I do think in Africa there's a better conversation to be had with donors. And I use the example of a positive example of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation here, because when I was at FERA and we got involved in cassava brown streak, FERA got involved on that project because we wanted to. That project, Great Lake Cassava Initiative, was all about moving cassava around East Africa, and that cassava was resistant to cassava mosaic disease. But brown streak was also a factor, and the Gates said we don't want to be associated with spreading this brown streak disease, trying to control mosaic disease. So FERA got involved for the testing on that. And we realized that by consequence of the partnerships that project was only working with the research partners. It wasn't working with the national plant protection organisations. So we engaged all the national plant protection organisations in East Africa on that cassava project and did risk analysis, is where the risk analysis came in and the testing. And subsequent to that, Gates in all their seed system projects have bought into the idea of involving national plant protection organisations as a partner. That wasn't happening before. And I think it's not a private public, but it's a donor thing. But in that seed systems, there is, Africa lacks a seed industry, and they're trying to privatize the cassava as a seed sector. So there is private sector seed people going into that now. So again, that private seed sector must value the certification of cassava material as a aspect that gives it price premium over non-certified seed. Because if certified seed and non-certified seed are out there, then and one's much more expensive than the other, then it only goes one way. And so the regulations have to control the non-certified seed such that the industry can then come through as having a market opportunity. Otherwise, it's not there. So I think these are the sorts of issues that private-public partnership needs to address. So it's a conversation as much as, and it's content specific to the country and the crop. But those were two examples that I would like to sort of flag as examples where if they come together and they talk it through, they'll realise it's better to work together. And I think they are.
Yeah. Still talking a bit about collaborations and partnership, what would you say are some of the challenges in establishing and maintaining this collaboration between government bodies and the private industry?
Projects is the problem over long-term sustained funding. And so if I went back to my pesticide resistance UK one, if I set up that platform, if that's based on a 5-year project or 3-year project, that's pointless. That's going to fold after that. So, that's the issue with the Gates funding projects that are 5 years. I mean, they're doing amazing work because they've got that long-term commitment, but they want to pull out. They need to withdraw from that. So that private-public partnership, you can kickstart it with funding, but you have to have an exit strategy by which it becomes sustainable. And that's where the idea of, say, with seed regulations that push down on non-seed or material that's available for planting that's not certified have to come through such that seed industry can be successful. I think there's an issue around institutes in Africa and NGOs who don't have an exit strategy. And I think that's a problem for the long-term sustainability of some of these things, because they build themselves into these systems and they require project funding to be successful themselves, whereas they should be able to withdraw and let the industry stand by itself. But I don't think no one has a business model where they sort of count themselves out 5 years on. So that's a tension, I think, between the sort of how NGOs and international research organizations support change in Africa, such that they need to. We don't have them here in the UK to the same extent. And
quite interesting experience that Julian has been sharing with us. Now I want us to, of course, focus on developing countries and your work. You've worked in a lot of these countries. You've mentioned a lot. So can you mention one success story from your work in developing countries that you are particularly proud of, or what lessons did you learn from it?
So I have mentioned one success story, which I think was the Gates involvement of the national plant protection organisations. But I do think, from when I started in 2005, sort of pushing this idea of pest risk, I feel that I've contributed quite a lot to that discussion, along with colleagues at IITA and CABI, not just myself, obviously, but we've presented a lot of material to people where we've said, look, pest risk analysis or understanding risk is something that we need to get better at. I've written documents for the FAO and that, and done consultancies. I wrote a document that was part of the CGR submission to the Paris Summit. That was in 2015, about climate change and future risks for Africa and not being prepared enough. That was, I thought, a highlight because it demonstrated my status as the author for being asked to do that, but equally that's what the CGR wanted to put into the summit that there was a lack of risk appetite, understanding in Africa, and so if you want to change the direction, understanding about risk was better, a good thing to do. So I think those are sort of two things I would point to. In the CGR, which is one of the consultative group of international agricultural research, they are primarily, I feel, a breeding company. They do plant breeding a lot, and in a sense, they do well when pests are a problem because they have the germplasms and the expertise to then remedy and breed against it. So if you look back at maize lethal necrosis, they then engaged in a 5-10 year breeding program to develop tolerant varieties to that, and I think that was good, a response. On the other side of that coin, there is an opportunity for the CGR to lead on risk analysis, and they have done that to some extent in more recent times, under some of the large programs that they're trying to develop or have been developing the last 5 years. Plant health was one of the major themes that emerged, and that was almost definitely attributable to work that we did on cassava and banana wilt, and work that I was central to. So hard to claim all that, but in bits.
Attribution and of course we see these, and some of us have worked with you and we can testify, and that's why we said yes, you remain a mentor to us and many more people. I think my other question is, what role do international organization and capacity building play in strengthening agricultural resilience in developing nations?
There's a principle of subsidiarity that is sometimes talked about but not applied as well as it can be, in the sense that international organizations in developing countries, they're not international, because if they were international then they'd be applying their trade equally in the UK as they are in Nigeria, but they're not. So why are they not? So they're not truly international in that sense. So I think there is an opportunity for international organizations to be more international in what they do, and I think if they took that mindset, they realized that quite a lot of what they're doing in international development is actually slowing progress, so that they need to sort of provide space for national research organizations. Those organizations need the headroom to grow into, and that principle of subsidiarity is around, if it can be done locally by national partners, then it should be done locally by the national partners. And for Rothamsted here in the UK, there's no role for Rothamsted in Africa doing something that can be done locally. We have to do something which is best done either uniquely by us, in which case we create the training, the capacity, and such you can do it, or we do it internationally as a service for the whole. And there's obviously duplication of expertise, and that always is, even in the corridors down here, there's duplication of expertise, but there is between institutes and countries. But somewhere I think there's a better mix of empowering capacity in international development through organizations like the international organizations, which identifies again their exit strategy from that role. But if they exit, that's when they have to move themselves to a different business model. And I think currently the role of international development organizations and NGOs, their business model isn't enabling Africa to grow to the extent it can. Because, let's be blunt, if IITA wanted to come and set up a research organization next to FERA and compete with UK funding, we'd find that rather difficult to stomach. Yet for somehow in Africa that's seen as best practice, normal practice. And then later on to that, actually, it's not just that they're competing for our funding in those countries, but the money first goes to them, and then we have to apply for it from them. That's bizarre. And in other situations that would never be tolerated or accepted. So I think there's a lot to look about where the money comes from and how it flows, which empowers the national countries in Africa, and it's much better than it was. Things have changed massively in my time. Agriculture as an industry is a great thing for changing for the good. Many countries have difficulties and stuff, but we've made tremendous change in agriculture. We've got far more women in agriculture, far more diversity in agriculture, empowering youth and stuff. I think good things have happened in agriculture, which to be proud of. And so capacity has definitely grown in Africa from when I started. There's things around capacity and PhDs. And I think PhDs are really great things to have. And if I just here in Rothamsted, we have in my strategic area, I have a disproportionate number of PhDs across the roster, and I'm really proud of that because I think that's vibrant and necessarily great for. Some of them will stay with us. A lot of them will go elsewhere,
exactly.
and some of them will leave agriculture altogether. I look back at my PhDs, and I think one or two of us maintained it in that. But in the UK, we took a position, and many people have taken a position that if we provide PhDs to African researchers, and they go out of Africa, and that's a waste of funding. But I don't think that's the case, because some of them, majority of them, stay in agriculture. They may be based in the UK or Africa, but they still that network, and then others come back at some point. Some stay, but in the long term, the benefits of PhD programs and creating that capacity, that African capacity, is essential.
Thank you very much for that. And now we're going to go into the future. So I would say, looking at the future in agriculture, and particularly food sustainability and food safety, what do you think are the biggest disruptors or innovations we should be expecting in 20 years?
That's a tough one. I mean, everyone's talking about AI. It's all things to all people. I don't know quite what we'd mean by AI, to be truthful. I think agriculture, 20 years, I think it might look very much the same. I would like to think it will look the same.
Okay.
I'd like to think that we're still accessing the same types of food, but that's perhaps, these ideas of plant-based foods and all that sort of science on that might come through.
Animal proteins.
These sort of things. You can envisage a future where everything comes in a tube. I'm not sure that would excite people, but I think if that happened, then a lot of other things would have happened that aren't for the good, because that would be a situation that we've been forced into. So climate change may well create shocks that drive food insecurity, in which case we would have to we have the opportunity to massively reconstruct our food industry. You think of how much food is essential and what is nice. You could loads of redundancies of crops. In the UK, we put large areas to pumpkins that only serve November the 5th and never get eaten. It's ridiculous. So if things really got bad, then we could change our food systems massively such that we survived. But that wouldn't be a good scenario, so let's hope we don't go there. I wouldn't mind if we didn't grow pumpkins, so I think that's some of the opportunities that are here, and you're just not quite sure which way it's going to go. Here in the UK, we're looking at reducing our intensive agricultural land by 10%, so that we can open up that 10% to environmental outcomes. That would be a big change. 10% isn't massive, but we've got to do that without adding more pesticides, without adding more fertilizer. And I'm going back to this idea that we have to create values other than through yield and price and quality. So what that looks like is difficult.
Okay, so for me, also looking at the future, and of course leverage on your expertise to get advice for aspiring scientists, policymakers that are looking to enter into the agricultural sector. What advice would you offer?
I think it's a good career. I'd do it again. I've not had a design in my career particularly, but there's a lot of opportunity in agriculture, and I know we're struggling to get youth into agriculture, and that's an issue, and into farming, and probably new technology might help make that attractive. But I suppose that ultimately, again, it sort of comes down to the price and the profitability of farming isn't as much as it could be. And that's down to the supply chain squeeze and public not wanting to pay for food to the extent that they can. So I definitely encourage people to go into agriculture. It's a really interesting and rewarding career. You won't get massively rich from it.
You won't become Bill Gates from it, right?
No, you're not going to become a setup for fun, and that's how. But unless you create a disruptive technology which everyone buys into, which I say isn't out of scope. There's very interesting things happening in different areas of the world, looking at alternative proteins, insect proteins. What we see as food today might be completely different to what we see as food tomorrow. and how we value land in that context is all part of it. So if you can be part of that discussion, then I think and create change or influence the outcomes of landscapes, that's worth doing.
So I'd also like to ask, beyond your professional work, what aspect of agriculture are you also passionate about?
What parts of agriculture, my professional work?
Yeah, apart from your professional work, what other aspects of agriculture are you in love with?
I mean, agriculture. As I started, I like plants. I mean, I don't think it's agriculture related, but I have a fondness for gardening and plants and lawns. That's a hobby of mine. So after I'm done with Rothamsted, I quite happily do that. I have a collection of cacti, which is unusual, but I think that would keep me busy. I'm lucky I live in a rural area with agriculture around me, so I'll still see that. And I'll observe the government policies on sustainable farming initiatives, the SFIs, that encourage farmers to replant hedges, but first they have to destroy the hedges. I'm slightly confused by that one, but farmers get paid to do that. So I'll just observe and take note.
Maybe you can become a consultant in gardening.
Maybe. Lawn care.
Well, just to bring this to a close, I would like to be a little bit more personal. So if you could think back, what would you say? Was there a particular book? Was there a mentor, an experience that shaped your understanding of agriculture that made you decide to go the agricultural route?
Well, I suppose you would have to go back to my choices of taking a degree and just an enjoyment of nature. I think that has been my fundamental basis, and plants and how they grow. I'm not from an agricultural background, so it's not that my family have done this. It's just observations of plants and trees and stuff. But I think once I've been in the industry, the thing that really sort of shaped my career, where I've had the most success, was around isolating banana wilt. Things come with it. It was a lucky break in a sense, because it came to Rothamsted and I identified it and saw the risk that it presented. And from that point, I chose different options, and I've always from then sort of progressed this career around pest risk analysis and been successful and lucky in working with people at Farrer and yourselves and through the Gates Foundations. You have lucky breaks. I've had some lucky breaks. My first job at Cabby was on bacterial wilt of potato. That was then it was called Pseudomonas, now it's called Ralstonia. It happened that whilst I was doing that, bacterial wilt of potato became a quarantine outbreak in Europe and the UK, and I was the only person who knew what to do with it in the UK. So I had the opportunity to apply my science in the Netherlands and the UK. We were typing populations.
You're a superstar.
I didn't introduce it, just to be sure, into Europe. But it certainly was I got a lot of papers off the back of that, and a lot of profile. So these things aren't by design; they're just by chance. And if it wasn't them, something else would have happened, I suppose. But I think, and again, that bacterial wilt one was an outbreak in the UK, and it was really interesting to see how the contrast between how Europe addressed that risk of bacterial wilt in potato seed systems here in Europe, in the Netherlands, and traceability and dissecting out seed loss throughout from farms and in systems, compared to in Africa, where it was out and it was escaped and there was no getting it back. The parallel between the seed industry here and in Uganda or across East Africa at that time was striking. So, and the role of industry and government coming together to ensure that they got on top of it. And the Dutch, there was a big risk. They're going to lose a lot of money, so this was big business, and they reacted accordingly.
And I would say personally, I admire you a lot. So I would like to ask, probably on a final note. For me, you've got into like the height of your career. Did you ever at any point in time think, even though probably you didn't know how you were going to navigate it, did you ever think you would get to this height at any point in time in your life?
Not really. No, I don't know.
Or you just did what you what you had to do?
I'm not a career person. I challenge people. So challenged the Gates Foundation about what they were doing around seed systems and the lack of the National Plant Protection Organisation. So I think that's helped in some ways, but it's probably also hindered. So your social capital that you create around is sometimes goes up. Your stocks go up. Sometimes they go down.
You don't want to be your friends.
But I'm happy where I am. I reflect well. To be a science director at Rothamsted is pretty good.
It's very good.
This is got an amazing brand, amazing history, and so to be here is not insignificant.
It's been very interesting speaking with Julian, and I believe those who do not know should find out about Rothamsted, the history, the story, the long, history of these institutions' involvement in agriculture in the UK and of course the world. So they will understand the position, and
exactly.
It's been nice, speaking with you, and I'm sure this is going to inspire a lot of people to, venture into agriculture.
I hope so.
What I would ask finally is whether your kids, are they also into agriculture?
No, no, I'd say not.
Okay.
One communications and coding.
Coding is good.
Coding,
So coding into agriculture and communication.
I've not given up hope.
I would like to say thank you very much. It's been a privilege. Thank you for giving us your time out of your busy schedule.
Yes, it's been an honor.
So, on this episode, I want to say thank you to Dr. Julian once again, and we hope you join us on our next episode as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.